I know that many of you watching this video have had experience with these old Mercedes diesels, and if you have, you know how valuable these engines are becoming, particularly the OM617 turbo diesel engine. They're getting very, very hard to find used in any kind of good condition, and rebuilding them is very expensive, and you can't even get the original pistons at this point in time. And you just may not end up with that good of rebuild anyway. So I just had acquired this 1981 300 TD. The body's in very bad condition. It has been sitting for over 5 years in a field, and the owner said that he had the engine completely rebuilt, and then he had a bunch of problems with water leaks in the car, so he just parked it. And for years it just got rained on, full of water. It's got holes in the floor, holes in the rear section. So what I want to do is determine whether this engine is worth saving. And this may be the case with you. If you're out there looking for a good engine for your 300D or your 300 TD or CD, I tell you, there's some real bad ones out there. And so what I wanted to do in this video is kind of show you what I do when I go to determine whether or not an engine's worth saving. Now, if this is a good engine, it's coming out of the car and it's going to be put aside until I find a really nice car with a bad engine. So when I'm dealing with a situation like this, there's a number of tests I put the engine through before I make that decision. And that's what I want to do. I don't start tearing anything apart until I've had a chance to run the engine, do some tests, even drive the car if it's drivable. So what I want to show you now is the very first test I do. And it's quite simple. I see how quickly the engine will start. Now the engine's warm. I'm not doing this with it cold. I have another test for cold engines. But the engine's warm, and I want to show you the sound of how it starts up. And then I'm going to come out and show you a simple test. You've seen this in my other videos, and I call that the cap dance test. Let's see how this engine performs with those first two tests that I usually do. I'm not going to touch the throttle. I'm just going to reach in. I will pre-glow it. And let's see how many turns it takes before it starts. Look at that. Maybe only 2 revolutions and it fired right up. Now, did you notice that it fired right up with authority? It didn't just kind of stumble and blah, 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 blah. It didn't sound weak. It actually had some good kick to it. And that's what you're looking for. You're looking for a quick start with a good kick when it actually fires. Let's reach over, and I'm going to loosen up the oil filler cap. Be careful, if you have a really worn engine, you're going to get oil spraying out of there, so you want to kind of do this slowly. I'm going to reach over and just turn the cap, and I'll hold on to it, and then I'm going to see how much it moves. Okay, take a close look at that. You see it's dancing. Now, if it's jumping, so there's a difference between a light dance and a heavy jump. If it's jumping or it blows off the engine, it usually means you have excessive crankcase pressure, which means piston and ring wear. But this one is quite acceptable. Minor cap dance. For this test to be accurate, you want the engine up to full operating temperature, probably at least 20 minutes of driving time, and you want to make sure you have fairly new oil in the engine. And I did change the oil in the engine before I started these tests because I had no idea how old or the quality of the oil that was in the engine when I got it. So we're going to start the engine up. I want you to keep a close eye on this needle here. We're going to look at 2 things. We're going to look at how low the oil pressure indicates at idle, and then we're going to see how quickly it comes up to full pressure. That's real important. Not only how low it goes, but how quickly it comes up if it does drop down during idle. So we'll just fire it up. All right, look at that. Just under 2. Now that's very acceptable. Of course, if you're at 3, that's really good. But if you drop below 1, that's trouble. If you drop below a half, you probably shouldn't be driving the car. This is showing very acceptable oil pressure. Now watch how quickly it comes up. Watch this. I'm just going to push on the throttle a little bit. Probably won't go over 1,500 RPM. See how it comes up? Now, if I have to race the engine to 2,000 or 3,000 RPM to get it to come up to 3, and it comes up very slowly, that's a bad sign. Okay, watch again. See, it comes right up. Right when I come off idle, just give it a little fuel. Okay, you're looking at what I call acceptable hot idle oil pressure on an OM 617 turbo diesel engine. And I know some of you are curious, you're thinking, well, Ken, how does that indicate engine health? Well, remember, the pressure is developed from the tightness of all the bearings, primarily in the crankshaft. And if you have a lot of loose bearings or excessive wear in your rod bearings or main bearings, you're going to have low hot idle oil pressure. So this particular test, I would say it gets a passing grade. Now let's go do my next test. Here is another real simple test, and it's something I usually do even when I go to look at a diesel. My daughter Kai and I, we laugh. We always make sure we have a 10mm wrench with us to pull this air filter housing off, because usually the wing nut is lost. This is a great test for any of those 1976 to 1985 OM616 and OM617 diesels, is take a good look at the air filter. Now, I have no idea the condition of this one. I haven't pulled this off yet, and it could have been changed. So you got to kind of remember that this only works if it's been in there and somebody hasn't changed it. But looking at the air filter can give you a pretty good idea of how much blow-by the engine has. Okay. So this air filter's been changed. So that test won't work. But if you do go look at one of these, or you're checking an old engine out, and you pull this air filter out and it's real oily, that's a bad sign. Usually means there's quite a bit of crankcase blow-by, and oil is getting into the air filter housing here. So it doesn't look too bad. You know, I've got my hand down here. I'm looking at this. I'm looking at the oil coming out of the breathers. Next up is what I call the no glow test. In other words, I'm going to see if this engine will start without pre-glowing it. I'm just going to get in the car and crank and see what happens. Now, the car is set overnight. You don't want to do this when it's hot. You also don't want to try to do it when it's freezing cold, because a lot of these engines won't start. But it's a spring day, about 60 degrees. And if this is a really healthy engine, I can get in there and start cranking and it will start. Depending upon the wear and the compression, it may take a little longer. But if it starts right away without pre-glow, it's a really strong engine. And let's see what happens with this one. Okay, I'm inside. I'm just going to turn the key. Now the battery's kind of low, so that's even a better sign. You know, if that battery were really spinning, this thing would have fired up a lot sooner. The other thing is I don't have my foot on the throttle. So you can see from that, of course, if you're cranking and it takes over 10 seconds, while you're cranking, the glow plugs are heating up. I've had engines that'll take 4 or 5 seconds without pre-glowing and just fire right up. If it won't start, don't give up hope. There's other tests we're going to do. Now the fuel's old in the tank. I haven't flushed the tank, but I'm going to let you hear this, then I'm going to let you see the exhaust. I don't know if you can hear that noise. You have to be a little familiar with these engines. But it has a little bit of a metallic sound I'm not happy with. It could be the fuel injectors. And because it's smoking so much, we may have a problem with old fuel. Old fuel, by the way, will make weird knocking noises in these old diesels. From that last scene, you can see why I'm a little concerned about that smoke. That's a lot of smoke. And remember, this car has been sitting for 5 years. You know, it's probably got gummed up fuel injectors, gummed up injection pump, crud in the fuel lines, who knows what's in the fuel tank. So by doing a diesel purge, I'm bypassing the entire fuel system. I've got the tank outlet going right into my pre-filter, and the return from the top of the fuel filter is going right back into this tank. So this engine will be running on this tank right here. And I've got 2 full bottles of diesel purge. Look at how clear that is. As we go through this, probably take about a half hour, I'll show you from time to time the color of the purge. That gives you a pretty good idea just how dirty the fuel system is. When working with this diesel purge, you have to be very careful not to drip any on your rubber motor mounts. If you think diesel fuel and engine oil is bad for your motor mounts, you spill any of this diesel purge down there on that mount, and it's really going to shorten its life. So I've protected the motor mount and the shock with this plastic. I've got a drip pan underneath. And when you disconnect the fuel supply hose right here, be sure and plug it. I've plugged it here with a 5/16" bolt. If you don't plug it and this starts to drain, it'll actually siphon out of the tank, and you'll come back and you'll have diesel fuel all over the ground. Now it's going to stumble here a little bit because it's probably sucking a little air. And you can definitely hear the rattle of the fuel injectors. I'm going to note the time now. It's now 10 minutes to 3. So we're going to see how long it takes for the engine to quiet down, and then we're going to see how long it takes to complete the purge of 2 cans. So let's look at the tank. Not bad. That return fuel is coming back. That's diesel fuel there. You can see the yellowish color to it. Now let's rev the engine up a little bit. Okay, you got to listen to that. I'm going to let this run. We'll come back in 5 minutes and we'll repeat it. It's been 5 minutes. I've raced the engine up a few times. Let's take a look at the fluid coming back out of the fuel injection system. This is probably one of the cleanest purges I've ever done. I've done this procedure on engines where this all comes back black. So I don't think the fuel system is gummed up. You know, I'm not so sure about those injectors either, but we've got a clean purge going on here. You know, I've probably been through about, well, half of 1 bottle. So we're going to continue, but I want you to listen closely when I run the engine up to about 3,000 RPM. There's still a very minute metallic rattle going on in here. You know, I'm not sure what that is yet, but let's go back and take a look at the exhaust note. Well, you can see we got some improvement back there, but the smoke is not gone. Usually on a very healthy and well-tuned engine, if you're doing a purge, you'll hardly get any smoke at all. It's now 3:15. I think we're getting close to the end here. You know, I've still got maybe 3/4 of an inch left. Now, if the engine's healthy and you're running diesel purge, it should keep this smooth. You shouldn't be hearing any knocking noises. If I passed all these other tests, the next thing I would do is remove the valve cover, do a valve adjustment, and then do a compression test to confirm the health of this engine. I'm going to at least pull this valve cover and take a look at what's inside. So when I pull these injectors out, right away I could tell that these are either brand new or Bosch rebuilts because of the black coating. They're not rusty. And then I'll look at the tip, and the tips have absolutely no wear in them, just a little bit of soot. The soot probably gives you an indication that, yeah, obviously it's got a few thousand miles on it. But this is the real winner down in here. You look into these pre-chambers and you see no oil, no wetness in the pre-chambers. That's an indication this engine does not have any blow-by. So that was true with all 5 injectors. And then finally I decided, okay, let's pull the valve cover and see what the engine looks like inside. So when I finally got around to pulling this valve cover off, it was like opening a Christmas present. Now, those of you who have been around these diesel engines, you know what these look like when you pull the valve cover. So let's see if you're as shocked as I was. Look at that. I don't know about you, but I have never seen OM617 diesel engine this clean inside, short of having just been recently rebuilt. Look at that. There's no black oil. Look at those cam lobes. The chain is brand new. You can tell by looking at the chain. Looks like the guides are new. So I think in this case, I lucked out. I really did. Here's another quick inspection that you can do yourself to determine the health of your old diesel engine. Remember, engines get changed, speedometers get changed, but looking inside an engine doesn't get changed. It is what you find or what you see. And what I'm looking for here is the condition of the camshaft. And you're looking at the end of the lobes, each lobe, and you're looking for scoring. And if you see scoring there, or your fingernail catches on ridges on the tops of these cam lobes, it's a pretty good indication that the engine has suffered from neglect or lack of oil changes or high mileage. So this cam looks beautiful. So this passes my visual test. I will do a valve adjustment, of course. But the other thing is to check for chain stretch. I'm going to come right here at the top of the sprocket and try to lift the chain. Sometimes you'll get it so you can lift the chain almost half an inch, and that's really bad because if you lose a chain on one of these diesels, you know, it can be pretty catastrophic. But these chains on the sprockets usually wear for one of two reasons. One, a lack of oil changes. Number two, very high mileage. And this was looking almost like a brand new chain and tensioner because I'm pulling really hard here and I'm getting no lift. So this is excellent. This tells me this is an excellent engine internally. The other thing that'll help confirm that is to do a compression test. Remember, when you're doing all these tests and inspections, don't focus on any one thing. You could have, for instance, an engine where the cap on the valve cover is jumping up and down, but it passes everything else. You know, I wouldn't worry about excessive blow-by. It's just the nature of some of the engines. But this is letting me know right here that this is a pretty healthy engine. Following right behind removing the valve cover, here is another inspection that you can do that can visually give you an idea how healthy your diesel is. And that's remove the fuel injectors and inspect them. You want to do this anytime you get one of these old diesels. But when you remove the injectors, what you want to do is pay real close attention to what's going on inside that pre-chamber. Look here. Now, those of you who've been around diesels, you're going to say, oh my word, look, there's no oil in there. Well, this happens to probably be the best diesel engine I've ever seen as far as condition of pre-chambers. All 5 of these are dry. Now, what that tells you is you're not getting any oil blowing by the rings. Now, if you've got a lot of oil and wetness down in those pre-chambers, when you remove your fuel injectors, that doesn't mean your engine's at the end of its life, but it does mean it's probably blowing oil by and probably burning a little bit of oil when you're going down the road. But take a look at this one. I really get excited when I see something like that. I just finished a valve adjustment on this engine. Couldn't believe it. Not only are the pre-chambers exceptional, this is the easiest valve adjustment I've ever done. I only found 2 of these valves that were even slightly off and only had to adjust them 1 or 2 thousandths of an inch. So I'm going to go ahead and complete the valve adjustment. We'll put this engine back together and roll it outside. Now, that's probably all I'm going to cover in this video. I'm sure there's other tests you can do, but those are the simple ones to determine the health of your engine. And in parting, I'm going to fire this engine up for you, and we're going to do the cat dance test. You're going to be amazed at the results. Just a little sideshow here. I know this is not essential for reliability or performance, but when I take the valve covers off these old diesel engines to do the valve adjustment, look what I do. I polish them. Now you have to admit that looks pretty good, right? But the polish I use is a top secret, so don't ask. I'm outside now with one of my favorite 300D turbo sedans. This is a factory reman engine. You can tell by this ridge that's in the valve cover. And of course, this was the engine I showed you earlier that had almost spotless pre-chambers when we pulled those injectors out. So we've completed all the front end coolant service, adjusted the valves, tested the fuel injectors, and boy, does this baby run smooth. It's probably the best turbo diesel engine I've been around in all my experience of working on these. So what I'm going to do, I promised you I would show you the cat dance test on this engine. I'm going to fire it up. I want you to listen to how quickly it starts. I'm in the car. I'm going to do a quick blow and then hit the starter. See how quickly that's fired up? Okay, let's move up and do that cat dance test on this engine. Okay, at idle, I'm going to loosen the cap. Okay, it's vibrating a little bit. That's mostly engine vibration. It's not jumping. But the real test is when I accelerate the engine, because a lot of times the cap may not move very much. So you punch it. You call it punching it. Let's see what happens with the cap when I really get the power. Look at that. It doesn't even move. So therefore, that is a really good engine. Now I know some of you are thinking, hey, what am I going to do if all these tests don't pass very well on my engine? We're going to cover in the next video in this series.